The man behind the counter didn't know his name. That was the whole problem. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October 1968, and Manny's Music on 48th Street was doing what it always did on slow weekday afternoons, existing. The store sat in the middle of what musicians called the block, a strip of music shops between 6th and 7th Avenues, where half of New York's working players bought their gear, argued about strings, and spent money they didn't have on instruments they didn't need. Manny's was the oldest of them, and maybe the most serious. No nonsense. No tourists, just guitars, amps, the smell of rosin and old wood, and men who knew the difference. Ray Coulter had been working weekend and weekday shifts at Manny's for almost 2 years. He was 26, from a small town in New Jersey, and had moved to the city with one plan: session work. He'd done some of it, too. A few jingle recordings, a couple of album dates for artists nobody would remember, one decent run with a touring band that took him as far west as Chicago. He was good. He knew it. More importantly, he played in a way that made other people know it. Fast, clean, technically precise. He could sight read anything put in front of him. He could solo in 4 different idioms without breaking a sweat. The job at Manny's was supposed to be temporary, a way to stay close to the scene while the session work built itself into something reliable. But 2 years in, the shifts had settled into routine. He knew which regulars were serious and which ones came in to feel the weight of something expensive. He knew the inventory better than he knew most of the people in his life. He could tell the age of a guitar by the smell of the case before he opened it. That kind of knowledge had a way of making a person feel more certain than they had any right to be. On days like this, between customers, he'd take down one of the premium guitars from the wall and play. Not to sell it, just to play. To remind himself that he was the kind of person who could. That afternoon, he'd pulled down a 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard. Not a reissue. The real thing, consigned by a collector who'd moved out of the country. Sunburst finish. Original PAF humbuckers. The binding on the neck had yellowed to the color of old paper. It was priced at $650, which in October 1968 was the kind of money that made people pause in the doorway and look at the tag twice. The guitar sat in a stand near the back wall, behind a small rope with a handwritten sign. Please ask before handling. Ray had the guitar in his lap when the door opened, and a man walked in. He was slight, maybe 5'10", wearing a dark pea coat over a plain shirt. His hair was pressed down under a wide-brimmed hat. No jewelry that Ray could see, no stage clothes, no rings, nothing that caught the light. He moved slowly, the way men move when they're browsing and not in a hurry, working his way along the wall of acoustics near the front, then drifting toward the electrics. Ray watched him the way you watch a stranger in a store when you're responsible for the inventory. The man moved unhurriedly through the floor, pausing at things, not reaching for them. He had the manner of someone who had been inside enough music stores to not be impressed by one. His eyes moved across the instruments the way a reader's eyes move across spines on a shelf, looking for something specific, not performing the act of looking. The man stopped in front of the Les Paul. He looked at it for a long moment without touching it, the way someone looks at a painting before they read the title. Then he looked at Ray. "That's a beautiful guitar." "It is," Ray agreed. He kept playing. A blues run in E, the kind of thing that sounded complicated to non-players. "59 standard, all original." The man nodded slowly. "How does she sound?" "Like a 59 Les Paul," Ray said, which was not quite an answer. He let the guitar do the rest, bending a note on the 3rd string, letting it sing. The guitar did respond that way, full and warm and somehow both dark and clear at once. He knew it sounded good. He wanted it to. "Can I try it?" Ray set down his pick. He looked at the man again. Quiet clothes, modest hat, no calluses visible on the hands from here. The kind of customer who came in, held a guitar, felt the weight of it, and left without buying. "It's a pretty specific instrument," Ray said. He kept his voice professionally neutral. "It's not like what you'd find in most stores. The setup is very low, barely any action. If you're used to a standard production guitar, it might feel strange. The pickups are original PAFs, so they're sensitive. They respond to technique, not the kind of guitar you just noodle around on." "I understand." I just want to make sure you know what you're holding, Ray continued, standing and lifting the guitar from his own lap. $650. Consigned piece. I'm responsible for it while it's on the floor. He paused. You play much? Some, the man said. Ray handed it over with both hands, the way you pass something fragile. The man took it, adjusted the strap without fumbling, and ran his thumb across the open strings once. Just once. He listened to the decay. Then he reached for the tuning pegs, checked each string by ear, made two small adjustments, the G, then the B, and stopped. It had taken him 11 seconds. Ray noticed. He said nothing. The man sat down on the stool near the back wall. He settled the guitar across his knee, his fretting hand resting light on the neck, not gripping it, just resting. He looked at the floor for a moment, the way some players do when they're finding something in their head before they go looking for it on the fretboard. Then Jimi Hendrix started to play. He didn't play one of his own songs. He played Robert Johnson. Crossroad Blues, the 1936 recording, stripped down to its original shape, just the skeleton of it, the thing that was there before anyone added electricity or volume or effects. He played it the way you play something you learned when you were 14 years old and couldn't afford an amp, when the guitar was just wood and wire, in your own two hands and whatever you could pull out of a record spinning at 78 revolutions per minute in your father's living room. The first 4 bars stopped Ray cold. He didn't process it all at once. It came in stages. First, the timing. So relaxed it seemed almost lazy, the way Johnson's original felt, like the beat was something you leaned against rather than kept. Then the phrasing, the way each note bent and resolved, not with theatrical precision, but with something closer to conversation, the guitar answering itself. Then the left hand, the thumb working a bass pattern independent of the fingers, the two moving at different tempos inside the same time signature, making one guitar sound like a thing with more parts than it had. There was no amp. The guitar was completely unplugged, running acoustically through the body of the wood. At $650, the Les Paul was built well enough that it still sang, dry and full, filling the back of the store with a sound that had no business being that present, that resonant, that complete. It was the kind of playing where you stopped hearing technique and started hearing intent. Ray's own guitar was still in his lap. He had not moved. A customer near the front of the store looked up from a catalog. 2 of Manny's other employees drifted in from the back, drawn by some acoustic change in the room, the way animals sense weather. A teenage kid who'd been trying out a Telecaster 2 stands over quietly, put it back on the hook, and walked closer. Nobody spoke. Jimi played through the song the way Johnson recorded it, without embellishment, without adding anything that wasn't already there. That was the hardest part to understand if you were a technician, that he wasn't showing off. He was just playing the song, clean and true the way a language sounds in the mouth of someone who grew up speaking it rather than studying it from a book. There was no performance in it, no awareness of the room gathering around him. If he noticed the silence or the stillness, nothing in his hands showed it. There was one moment, maybe 90 seconds in, deep in the second verse, where Jimi paused between phrases for just a beat longer than the song required. A breath, a space. And in that space, the room seemed to contract slightly, everyone leaning forward without meaning to, the silence itself becoming part of the music. And then his fingers moved again, and the note that followed landed with a weight that made at least one person in that room exhale without realizing they'd been holding their breath. He played for 4 minutes, maybe a little less. When he stopped, the last note decayed slowly in the body of the guitar. He let it go completely before he moved. Then he stood, unhooked the strap, and held the guitar back out toward Ray with both hands. Ray took it. Jimi reached up and adjusted his hat. He looked at the guitar once more, then at the price tag hanging from the tuning peg. "Good instrument," he said. He walked to the front of the store, past the acoustic wall, past the catalog rack, through the door, and out onto 48th Street. Ray stood there for a moment with the Les Paul in his hands. The teenage kid had his phone. No, wait. This was 1968, no phones. He was just standing there with his mouth open. One of the other employees, a man named Dennis who'd been working at Manny's for 6 years and had seen most things, turned to Ray and said very quietly, "Do you know who that was?" Ray didn't answer right away. "That was Jimi Hendrix," Dennis said. Ray looked at the door. The name had been everywhere for a year. "Are you experienced?" The Fillmore. The guitarist that other guitarists talked about in lowered voices. The way you talk about something you're still trying to make sense of. Ray had heard the records. He'd heard the solos, the feedback, the controlled chaos of the electric stuff. He'd thought, the way a lot of players thought, that it was spectacle, that the volume and the effects were doing most of the work, that if you took it all away, if you sat someone like that down with an acoustic or a vintage electric, no pedals, no Marshall stack, just the instrument and the hands. He was still holding the Les Paul. In 1991, Ray Coulter gave an interview to a small music publication in New Jersey. He'd had a decent career by then. Session credits on about 40 albums, a good reputation among working musicians. He'd never made it the way he'd planned when he moved to New York, but he'd played with people whose names he was proud to say. The interviewer asked him about the strangest thing he'd ever seen in a music store. Ray laughed before the question was finished. "October 1968, he said. Manny's on 48th. A man came in, quiet, no flash, nothing. I gave him the whole speech about how the guitar was sensitive and expensive and required experienced hands. I literally said the words experienced hands to Jimi Hendrix. I told him to be careful with it." He paused. He played Robert Johnson for 4 minutes, without effects, without an amp, just the guitar on a stool in the back of the store. And I stood there holding my own guitar like I'd forgotten what it was for. The interviewer asked, "What did you feel?" Ray thought for a moment. "I felt like I'd been very loudly wrong about something I thought I understood," he said. And the worst part, or maybe the best part, was that he never said a single word about it. He just played. Then he handed it back and left, like it was nothing, like he'd just proven something he didn't even need to prove. He looked at his hands. "That's what I think about now when I start to assume I know something about another player before I've heard them. I hear that Robert Johnson, and I shut up." Outside on 48th Street, the afternoon traffic moved the way it always did. Cabs, delivery trucks, the sound of the city doing its usual work. Jimmy walked east, hat low, hands in his pockets. He had a session that evening. He was thinking about the guitar he'd just held, the way the wood had felt, how the old pickups responded to the lightest touch, how there was no distance between thought and sound on an instrument like that. He had not been trying to prove anything. He almost never was.